I am Sabrina. As I write these lines, I can still feel the lingering echoes of those days trembling within me. It's as if, with every breath, I can hear the reverberation of that turmoil, those intensely burning emotions. This is a confession, yet one without any regret. Because I embrace every moment I lived, with all its pride, its pain, and its pleasure-charged tension. What guided me was nothing but the stubborn force bubbling inside me and that inevitable attraction that tested my limits. Now, I will tell you a memory that can never be erased. The striking story of Amir and me within the cold walls of that hospital. I remember the day I first stepped into the hospital. I was young, 22, from a poor but proud family, having overcome the arduous path of medical school. This hospital, with its wide corridors, sterile smell, and bright lights, was the stage where I would first commit myself fully to my profession. The white coat on my shoulders didn't yet feel entirely mine. It was oversized, not quite fitted, whispering with each step, "You're new here. There's so much for you to learn." But I was hopeful. I wanted to be a good doctor, to exist without being diminished under anyone's shadow. That morning, a name echoed repeatedly in my ears. Amir, the hospital's best, most famous, most sought-after doctor. Whispers about him, praise, admiration, floated through the corridors. It was as if the women doctors had formed a circle around him, some looking on with admiration, others with a sort of surrender. But Amir's approach was entirely different. He offered no kindness, believed in no emotions, and scorned the idea of love. Cold, reserved, arrogant. And though he impressed everyone with his intellect, he had built thick walls between himself and others. Never did I imagine a crack would appear in one of those walls. Our first encounter took place under his stern gaze when I quietly entered his office. It was as if, in his world, I did not exist. I introduced myself in a trembling voice, handed over the documents. He frowned slightly, the corner of his mouth curled in a merciless sneer. In that moment, something splintered inside me. The look of this man, whom I'd just met, pierced my pride like a thorn. But I reminded myself I was new, that I had to maintain control. I withdrew silently. That was our first meeting. Fraught, tense, cold. As the days passed at the hospital, I began to understand Amir better. Watching the brilliance of his medical skill, it was impossible not to acknowledge his excellence as a doctor. He operated with masterful prowess and tackled critical cases with astonishing composure. Yet, his attitude toward people, never offering a single compliment, especially to women, remaining distant, arrogant, sometimes even disparaging, bothered me. Whenever I caught his gaze, an unsettling stir arose within me. Anger, curiosity, and an uncontrolled attraction intertwined. One day, a complicated case arrived in the emergency department. A young girl had been in a traffic accident. Blood, anxiety, the relentless rush of time. I was doing my best when Amir appeared. Together, in a silent harmony, we stabilized the patient. His eyes met mine for a brief moment. Behind his usual stern expression, there seemed to be a trembling curiosity. In that instant, a spark flickered between us. Perhaps he didn't notice it, or maybe he pretended not to. But I felt it. It was the first glimmer of a hidden battle. Days passed. Amir began talking to me more frequently. But these weren't polite exchanges, rather tests of strength, challenges of intellect. He asked insistent questions, watched for my mistakes, tried cornering me at times. I did not give in. Each time I stood my ground, told him the truth, revealed what was on my mind. This charged interaction formed a strange tension between us. Some might have called it hostility, but in truth, It felt like an invisible string stretched taut above us, making us sharper even as it pulled us closer. Then one day, I noticed a different light in Amir's eyes. He was standing in a quiet corner of a corridor where no one else passed. As I walked by, he lowered the file in his hand. Our eyes met. This time, his gaze was neither scornful nor commanding. It was as if he were trying to understand the sparks I held inside. As I neared him, my heart raced. I passed him with a slight nod. But at that moment, I felt an indescribable warmth on my skin. It was a tension too elusive to name, uncertain, unsettling, yet mesmerizing. Then came that night shift. I was trying to solve a complex case in the emergency room when Amir appeared unexpectedly, even though he wasn't on duty. He still wore that stylish shirt, his eyes sharp with questioning. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice softer than I had anticipated. We worked together. As we changed IVs, our arms brushed, our eyes locked, our breaths mingled in that cramped space. Under the dim lights and the sterile smell, it felt as if our bodies spoke more than words. Something unsaid, something growing in the darkness of our gaze. When we finished, he took me up to the hospital's rooftop. A gentle breeze on my skin, the night wind through my hair. Amir stood before me. He said my name, Sabrina. This time his tone was vulnerable, confessional. "You know I'm drawn to you, don't you?" My heart tightened. Something seemingly impossible was unfolding. This man who scoffed at love was looking at me with an emotion too complicated to define. "You... so confident, so distant from love. How is this possible?" I wanted to ask. But before I could speak, he added, "I don't know what it is. I just see you when I close my eyes." I pushed him away gently. I didn't want to be so easily worn down or to surrender. Yet inside me, there was an unstoppable warmth, a trembling. As though the tension between us wasn't enough, he refused to give in as well. The next day, as I was getting coffee in the cafeteria, he approached me, looked over my notes. "Last night, you were good," he said. He struggled not to lose control, but his eyes had softened. I pretended not to hear, or so it seemed. Great waves were rising inside me. Over time, Amir could no longer hide his interest in me. Everyone in the hospital noticed. The more I pulled away, the more he made subtle gestures, unable to look away. There was a silent pushing and pulling between us. He wanted to have me, while I wanted to see how far he'd go before I truly yielded. Perhaps it was a test. I preserved my pride, intent on proving to myself that he too was human, that he had vulnerabilities. One evening, we faced each other in a dimly lit conference room on the upper floors. It was raining outside. Inside, it was just the two of us. Amir closed the door. His eyes were filled with an unbridled emotion. The tension between us heated the air we breathed. As we moved closer, time seemed to slow. The nearness of his body, the touch of his breath. His gaze struck something deep within me. It was as though unspoken confessions hovered between our lips. He leaned in slightly, his breath echoing against my cheek. The feeling inside was like a boulder rolling down a slope. Unstoppable, powerful, yet destructive. I took his hand and drew back. He shouldn't think he could win me over so easily. It was hard to ignore the fire within me, but I turned my face away. In that moment, astonishment, anger, and desire blended on his face. By clashing this way, approaching and retreating, we intensified the tension. It was a force of attraction beyond words. After that, Amir tried his own ways to break down my walls. He assigned me difficult cases on purpose, tested me, and communicated approval or disapproval with his eyes. It both drained and fueled me. Every minute with him was like a potent energy coursing through my veins. Even at home, I couldn't get him out of my mind. One evening, he appeared at my window, waiting in the rain. Surprised, I opened the door. Before me stood an Amir without masks, no longer hiding his turmoil.
"I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered. His words, his voice, his gaze. As they spilled forth, something inside me both shattered and rebuilt itself. I let him in. Silent, thoughtful, he sat without taking his eyes off me. There was an understanding between us, beyond words. As we drew closer, all my darkest corners, my fears and desires, surfaced. This went beyond physical attraction. It was a moment where two souls touched, where even a glance felt as sensitive as skin. The nearness of our bodies, the thickening air, the subtle hum of tension. These details are hard to convey, yet they seared into my very core.
That night, we shared something beyond verbal expression. Touches served more as the language of emotions. Our gazes fell into a deep void, as if we were exploring entire universes within each other. A timeless, placeless harmony. In that moment, we held a secret between us, a common truth. Through his hands, his eyes, his voice, I lived out all my stubbornness in another form. In the silence of the night, as the rain stubbornly tapped at my window, the rhythm of my heart found its tempo in his presence. The next morning, back at the hospital, I caught his sharp gaze in the corridors again. But this time, something had changed. Sometimes he was still stern, still arrogant. Yet this new balance, this silent pact forged in the darkness of night, had given our glances another dimension. Other doctors and nurses circled around, but we shared an invisible secret in the shadows. They still saw him as stern, arrogant, unreachable. But I knew that beneath that arrogant shell, a trembling heart existed. Amir had witnessed my determination, fueled by inner fire. When the elevator doors closed, sometimes our eyes met, cramming countless emotions into a few silent seconds. Without uttering a word, simply by looking, we reminded each other of the intense emotions of that night. If his hand grazed mine, even briefly, I felt a gentle warmth at my fingertips, a soft vibration. This wasn't a mere closeness. It was two people stripped of all their armor, discovering each other like works of art. The hospital walls bore witness to this tension, the operating room lights shimmering in our shared glances. As time passed, the passionate gravity in Amir's gaze when he looked at me clashed with my proud resistance and drew me into a molten river of feeling. And I fed on his state as well. The emotion rising within us fit neither the innocence of pure love, nor the lightness of a casual attraction. It was a singular blend: passion, ambition, stubbornness, curiosity, and an irresistible pull. In the hospital's dim corners, during brief pauses, each time we approached one another, we revealed one more piece of ourselves. In those silent meetings, we experienced a closeness that transcended the physical. It was as if with each step, we built bridges over the chasms inside us, healing our wounds, sharing our fears. Eventually, in that calm yet profound interplay, everything we experienced turned into parts of what made me who I am. Now, when I look back, I see how that young, somewhat timid and innocent Sabrina has changed. The transformation was ruthless, yet it was a powerful process. Touching Amir's hardened shell, discovering the fragility inside him, helped me understand myself anew. This story held desire, passion, tension, and shadowed glances. Yet it unfolded with such balance and emotional intensity that I regret none of it. This wasn't about reckless pursuit of pleasure, but rather about two souls striving to understand each other, where opposites collided and every spark birthed a new feeling. This is my story, my confession. Here, pain and pleasure intertwined, love and disbelief dined at the same table. But I have no regrets, because this experience made me who I am, revealing my inner strength, stubbornness, resilience, and desire. Amir, too, found a light in his own darkness. In the end, it wasn't just physical closeness, but a discovery of emotions, the voicing of desires, and a journey of self-awareness. And I, Sabrina, am not sorry at all for taking that journey.